Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, before I start my contribution, I wish to note that the Honourable Prime Minister, in his delivery, conveniently uses comparisons. At one point, he uses the projected outturn. At another point, he uses the approved estimates. And another time, he uses the actuals. I just want to note that, Mr. Speaker. There is no consistency in the comparisons that the Prime Minister uses. Mr. Speaker, Julius Caesar was warned in the play by William Shakespeare to beware of the Ides of March. St. Lucians must take heed of the Minister of Finance Ides of March estimates of 2018 and 2019 and brace themselves for a very difficult time ahead. The Prime Minister and Minister of Finance, however, much he may want us to think otherwise, is now presiding over a government that is clueless and is on a path, a reckless path, gambling away with the limited natural and financial resources of the country. Mr. Speaker, these Ides of March estimates offer a bitter pill with no hope of improving the well-being of St. Lucians. The people of St. Lucia will feel the pain of the unrealistic promises of an uncaring and vindictive government that divides the people rather than unite them. This government fails to take responsibility for its actions, always finding someone to blame, expending all its energies in vilification and name-calling of the opposition. Mr. Speaker, the Ides of March estimates are unrealistic, reckless, uncaring, careless, and based on false projections. It fails to deal with the problems of the people of the country. It is blind to the reality and sufferings of a people, complaining about inadequate health care, crime, victimization, and the arrogance of a government that puts the interests of foreigners, friends, and family above the ordinary St. Lucian. It does not offer any hope to the young people of St. Lucia or the poor or unfortunate. Mr. Speaker, these estimates confirm the continuation of alarming deficits and reducing surpluses. All the real income indicators are in a deteriorating situation. Mr. Speaker, I start with the current surplus, or the current deficit. In 2013, when we inherited the government, the current deficit was $53 million. In 2014, the current deficit was $10 million. In 2015, it came from a deficit to a surplus, from $10 million in deficit to $45 million of surplus. In 2016, it was $81 million of surplus. In 2017, $93 million of surplus. In 2018, $62 million, and projected to decrease in 2019 to 43 million. The situation is getting worse. 93 million surplus in 2017, 62 million surplus in 2018, and $43 million surplus in 2019. It is getting worse and not better. The surpluses are decreasing. Mr. Speaker, the recurrent surpluses and the deficit, that is recurrent revenue less recurrent expenses. In 2013, the deficit was $142 million. In 2014, the deficit was $60 million. In 2015, the deficit is $27 million. In 2016, it's $37 million. In 2017, it was $32 million. And in 2018, it's $61 million. The deficit is increasing. And in 2019, it's going to be $93 million, according to what the financial statement says. That means the deficit is increasing. The primary surplus, or the primary deficit, which is the total revenue minus the total expenditure less interest payments. In 2013, the primary deficit was $208 million. In 2014, it came down to $74 million. In 2015, in 2013, it was a deficit of $208 million. In 2014, it was a deficit of $74 million. In 2015, it was a surplus of $19 million. In 2016, it was a surplus of $29 million. In 2017, $85 million. In 2018, it's $45 million. And in 2019, it is projected to be only $16 million. The surpluses are decreasing. The overall surplus, or the overall surplus and the overall deficit, which is the total revenue minus the total expenditure. And for those of you who are baffled, all these figures are contained in the estimates of revenue and expenditure, page 3 of the budget summary. All these figures are there for everyone to see and read. Everyone can see and read them. In 2013, the overall surplus was $234. The overall surplus or the overall deficit was $234 million. In 2014, it was $211 million. In 2015, it was $128 million. In 2016, it was $127 million. In 2017, it was $73 million. In 2018, the deficit is increasing to $116 million. And in 2019, it's going to increase to $163 million. Mr. Speaker, the financial situation of the country is alarming. And regardless of the increases in revenue and taxation, namely the fuel tax and the airport tax, the increase in taxation, the deficits are increasing and the surpluses are decreasing. And this was noted by the ECCB in a report that the government itself said, when it said there was an improvement in the fiscal performance in the past 4 years. This improvement has been reversed. And, Mr. Speaker, in the Social and Economic Review of 2017, page 9, and I quote, "Despite an improvement in revenue, the government's fiscal situation is expected to deteriorate in 2018 with smaller surpluses and larger deficits." Page 9 of the Social and Economic Review. Not my words, words of Social and Economic Review. Simply said, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance is not managing the fiscal health of our country wisely. There is a high dependence and a hope of some large magical project that will improve the fiscal situation in St. Lucia in 2019. Some trickle-down economics. Some benefactor will come from abroad and build a big project and all will be fine. The government continues to spend and increase the fiscal decline of our country. What is the government spending on? Our school plant is still in a deplorable state. Our children don't have access to computers or tablets. Our social programs and relief to the poor has not improved. The SMILE program was stopped. The NICE program was stopped, and 100 workers were fired. Our playing fields are left in a deplorable state, and there are still no marked improvements in our playing fields. Our annual school sports has to be postponed several times because there was no water or electricity at the Darren Sammy grounds. The lights at the Marshall grounds are not being serviced, and the unemployed youth are asked to pay for use of the lights at the facilities. Our deficits are increasing, but we continue to give massive tax breaks to foreign firms, hoping for some magic solution to our problems. But the government continues to spend and makes every elected and selected UW politician a minister, but can't afford them to appoint a deputy speaker because of the difference in salary between a minister and the deputy speaker. The government is increasing the deficit, but refuses to support the National Trust or increase the subvention to the Blind Welfare Authority, the Blind Welfare Organization. In fact, the Minister of Finance has completely removed the National Trust from the estimates, meaning that they do not think that the National Trust should even exist. Madam Speaker, the St. Lucia Labour Party, Mr. Speaker, sorry. The St. Lucia Labour Party will in its first budget, when we return to power, will immediately reinstate the National Trust Subvention and will increase the allocation to the Blind Welfare Association. The government is spending money, but conditions in some of our police stations are deplorable. Our police are told that they must depend on dinners and the goodwill of private citizens to improve their situation. The government is interested in crime. They say crime is alarming. But the only capital expenditure for our police this year is the purchase of communications network. That's the only capital purchases for the police this year, is the increase, is a purchase of a communications network. There is no visible capital expenditure for youth and sports, except $150,000 for a vehicle. There is no expenditure on the completion of the Columbet lookout in Soufrière. The government's priorities are not people-focused. Its emphasis on foreigners, friends, and family. The expenditure on the community after-school program has decreased from $500,000 to $240,000. The allocation for sports equipment is not budgeted for in the 2018-2019 estimates. There is no allocation for sports equipment. Yet we have a government that is boasting about performance and youth. Mr. Speaker, the Labour Party remains convinced that the adequate investments in the agency responsible for youth development and apparent lack of strategic direction in government's overall youth development strategy will contribute immensely to increased anxiety, frustration, and the hopelessness among significant sections of St. Lucia's youth population. Such a situation is untenable and cannot be left to fester. We have a historical and moral responsibility to active dispatch to provide our young people with hope for equitable access to resources. A further look at the estimates, Mr. Speaker, will show that the UWP government spends more money on consultants, most of them non-St. Lucians, than it spends on public assistance to the poor people of St. Lucia. Or it spends on youth or repairs to schools. Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the civil service of St. Lucia abounds with qualified, knowledgeable, skilled, and experienced civil servants. But they are not allowed to work independently, and the government does not trust them. They have embarked on a reign of terror and interference in the civil service. And some government ministers have openly attacked civil servants. In fact, they attack drivers, they attack people who teach people to drive. They attack everyone. They have, in fact, the policy of exclusion and victimization and vindictiveness has caused a cloud of fear in the civil service. The government's response is to spend on consultants, who in most cases have to depend on the local civil service to provide the information. Mr. Speaker, you must have noticed the fanciful renderings for sports facilities displayed at the Sports Awards ceremony this year. The young people of St. Lucia, who cannot afford sporting equipment, who cannot afford boots, who cannot afford uniforms, and have to approach politicians for sporting gear, would be surprised to hear that this year's allocation intends to spend $581,000 in the year 2018 and 2019, and $554,201 in the year 2019-2020 on consultancy services in the Ministry of Sports. $1 million in 2 years on consultancy services. And Mr. Speaker, there's a new expenditure item called advertising, which never existed in prior years and is included this year and called advertising, with an allocation of $1.7 million in 2018-2019. We ask the question, what advertising that the Ministry of Sports suddenly has to do that they never did in the previous years? $1.7 million for advertising. So in the Ministry of Sports, you have a total of over $2.7 million between consultants and advertising, and you have zero for capital expenditure for the young people of St. Lucia. I hope that the young people of St. Lucia know that advertising is the largest allocation in the Ministry of Sports budget. And I'm sure my colleague in youth development will expand. I spoke earlier on the government spending and lack of confidence in the civil service. The estimates, Mr. Speaker, will show that the government of St. Lucia is spending more money on consultancy services than on public assistance to the poor people of St. Lucia. They are spending more money. Gouvernement ka bay pliant pour moun yo ka créer consultants. Pli l'argent passé yo ka bay l'argent pour ces gens pauvres là en cette ici. And Mr. Speaker, I refer again to the estimates of revenue and expenditure. In 2011, professional consultancy services was $3.9 million. In 2012, professional consulting services was $5 million. In 2013, consultants and professional services was $7.1 million. In 2014, professional consulting services was $5.3 million. In 2015, consultants and professional services is $7 million. In 2016, consultants and professional services is $8.6 million. In 2017, consultants and professional services is $8.9 million. In 2018, professional consulting services is $12 million. And in 2019, consultants and professional services is projected to be $14.1 million. This government has increased professional consulting services by $5 million in 3 years. And all the figures I've stated are available in the estimates of expenditure and revenue, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we would like to know who were these consulting services paid to and for what purpose? Madam Speaker, we will analyze public assistance, Madam Speaker. In the year 2011, we paid $4.6 million for public assistance. In the year 2012, now I want you to compare them. I want you to compare it, Madam Speaker. In 2011, on the labor, $3.9 million for professional consulting services. In 2011, on the labor, $4.6 million for public assistance. In 2012, on the labor, $5 million for professional consulting services. In 2012, on the labor, $5.5 million for public assistance. I want you to look at the trend, Mr. Speaker. In 2013, $7.1 million for professional and consultancy services. In 2013. In 2013, $5.5 million for public assistance.
Honorable member.
In 2014,
Honorable member. Honorable members, I'm just going to guide you accordingly. According to standing orders, a speaker ought to be heard in silence. Thank you very much.
In 2014, $5.3 million was spent on professional consulting services and $5.7 million on public assistance. In 2015, $7 million on professional consulting services and $8 million on public assistance. In 2016, $8.6 million on professional consulting services and $8 million on public assistance. In 2017, $8.9 million to pay consultants, $8.9 million in 2017, and $8.2 million on public assistance. In 2018, under the United Workers' Party, $12 million for consultants. And you know how much they spent on public assistance? $8 million. They spent more money on consultants to give fancy drawings than they spent on public assistance for the popular of St. Lucia. They spent $4 million. Gouvernement, yo dépensé $4 000 plus sous consultants, then yo dépensé à sous gens pauvres en pays. In 2018, their professional consulting services, they spent $12 million. But in public assistance, they spent $8.2 million, $4 million more on consultants than on the poor people of St. Lucia. And in 2019, they are spending $14.1 million on consultants and $8.2 million on public assistance for the poor people of St. Lucia. Madam Speaker, the question is, why is public assistance increasing and the money on consultants are decreasing? Mr. Speaker, the estimates also show expenditure of $16.5 million on acquisition of other investment in the year 2017 and 2018, up from $2.2 million in 2017 and $7.1 million projection in 2019. We ask the question, what was the acquisition of other investment? Which other investment did the St. Lucia government spend $16.5 million? What is that investment about? And was parliamentary approval sought for that capital expenditure? Mr. Speaker, this pattern of expenditure clearly indicates that even if the country is broke, the government is still spending on unnecessary items while the deficit is increasing. On the matter of expenditure, still a matter of expenditure, Mr. Speaker, on page 56 of the Social and Economic Review, it reads, there is a caption that reads, and I quote, subvention to a newly established body and increased contributions to another organization. There is need for some more information on what was that newly established body that required an increased contribution for the taxpayers. What is that newly established body? Mr. Speaker, the estimates indicate that current expenditure increased by 4.4% during the fiscal year 2016-2017 and is projected to grow by 5.3% or $49.7 million by the end of this financial year. For the fiscal year 2018 to 2019, current expenditure is expected to increase by $1 to $1 billion, representing a further increase of 6.5% or $64 million over this year. Transfers have increased by 9.6% over 2017. What entities received that increase in transfers? The allocation for social transformation has decreased. And I want you to turn to page 460 on the estimates of revenue on expenditure. The allocation for social transformation has decreased from $8.5 million to $4.5 million. Expenditure of $7.9 million for NAPS. NAPS. How and on what entity was that money spent? Who spent where? What entities received money on the NAPS and how much did they receive? And Mr. Speaker, last year, when the government was boasting about Ojo Labs, I came here and I spoke about Cambridge Analytica, and they laughed at me. As usual, they laughed. That was a joke. What are you talking about? They laughed. I said to the people of St. Lucia that I am suspicious about this Ojo Labs business. Because how come the Prime Minister can say he jumped on a plane, went to Texas, he was going to Houston, but he passed and take a lime in Texas, and he met somebody there, and he told him, come and chat, come let's chat. Come and chat. And when he came to chat, he said, listen to me, I have a big investment to do. And he said, come, I'll do it for you. All right. And I'll pay the wages for you. I'll pay $1,000 per person. I will refit the entire place for you, just because you have an idea. And the idea is artificial intelligence, and that's so good. I'll employ 2,000 people. So I'll take $4 million of taxpayers' money, and I will put in it, and I will put in it, and then $10 million, and I will put in it, because I have to build some schools for some people's wives. I will put it in it, and then when I put my $5 million in Ojo Labs, the whole of Beaufort will be employed. And how these young people are doing so well. I said to myself, Tanto. I said to myself, there is more in Ojo Labs than meets the eye. But you see, they can sit here and laugh at you. They can sit here and victimize you. They can sit here and make and believe they can make you cry. They can do all that to us because here, but they cannot stop the international and global society. So when they expose Cambridge Analytica, and Cambridge Analytica says who paid who for what, and whose election campaign was funded by what, and who did SCL work for, they can't hide it. So what they do is they try their best to kill the messenger in St. Lucia. So they victimize the messenger. They cast all kind of aspersions on the messenger. But fact is, this government will be called very soon to tell the public of St. Lucia if they ever had any relationship with Cambridge Analytica, whether Cambridge Analytica ever offered to help them in their campaign, whether they ever used SCL, whether they ever used SCL, and why was it so important for them to have Ojo Labs? Because never before would the Prime Minister jump on a plane, go and take a lime in Texas. He actually said he was liming. And whilst he's liming, he'll take $10 million of taxpayers' money to invest in a private company that ought to make profit. A company that's doing so well. And to mama guide people, they use their surrogates to go on TV and show pictures. Ojo Labs, what a wonderful thing. And how that guy, and he's so much things for the people of the South. Cambridge Analytica will haunt you in the near future. Because you are tired. You are tired of coming. You are tired. You are tired of maligning. You are tired of doing these things to the people of St. Lucia, but the reality will hit you. And no surrogates, no amount of propaganda will hide the truth when the truth comes. So I want finally again to say why the haste for that investment in Ojo Labs, and what is the relationship between the St. Lucia government and Cambridge Analytica. I said so last year and you laughed at me. This year, the chickens have come home to roost. I await the response. I await it. Because you can laugh, you can snare, can do whatever you want. Two things you can't change. You cannot stop time, you can't stop time, and you cannot stop the global society. Mr. Speaker, current expenditure is increasing. But wise capital is underperforming. Capital expenditure is 3.5% less than the budgeted amount for 2017-2018 and 8% less than what was spent in 2015. Whereas current expenditure is increasing, the government is investing less in capital projects, less in schools, less in hospitals, and the government's public sector investment profile is dismal. Where is the government's investment in the economy? But investment in the economy is low because the government still believes that some magician will come from abroad. Some magician will come from abroad and solve all the problems of the people of St. Lucia. So you give that magician all your land, you give him half of your country, and he will solve the problems of St. Lucia. Mr. Speaker, the estimates show an underperforming economy and unrealistic projections. When compared to the projections, the economy underperformed in 2018, However, the government is projecting growth of 5.9% in revenue and grants, which represents a recovery of more than 8% over 2017. For a government that always speaks of high levels of taxation, tax revenue is projected to grow in the year 2018-2019 by 4% and further increase in the years after, which is higher than previous years. What does the government intend to do to raise the revenue from the tax increases that are proposed? I note that on page 8 of the estimates, there is an increase. On page 8 of the estimates, there is an increase in line item 012 of $15 million in excise tax. On page 8 of the estimates, there is an increase in line item 012 of $15 million in excise taxes. This cannot be the fuel tax. It cannot be the airport tax. Where does the government intend to raise these taxes? Considering they promise to reduce VAT and eventually to eliminate VAT, where will the new tax be implemented? Is it on the middle class? Is it on the lower income earners? And while the government continues to give general tax incentives and refunds to foreign companies. Mr. Speaker, a feature of the revenue profile in the estimates is the lower than expected level of grant financing received as compared to the projected figure. From a projected figure of $87 million in grants, the government only received $55 million, a decrease of 46%, and expects to receive $69 million next year in grants. It is reasonable to assume and to ask the question whether the donors are wary of a government that intends to demolish a $21 million meat processing facility to give up the land for speculation. Whether the donors are wary of a government that intends to demolish a $21 million meat processing facility to give up the land for speculation. Are donor countries wary of a government that refuses to accept and quickly make commitments to discuss their harmful tax policies and reluctantly take appropriate measures at the highest political level to cause the island to be removed from the EU blacklist? Are donor countries concerned whether their taxpayers are called upon to support climate change initiatives, but government arrogantly stops the subvention to the National Trust, the guardians of our natural heritage? Are donor countries comfortable when their taxpayer-funded initiatives donated for the constructions of hospitals are either left in a state of uncertainty or on the chopping block for demolition or alternative use? The world is small, Mr. Speaker, and while the government can victimize and attack its locals who dare to express a contrary view, the rest of the world is taking notes. The Minister of Finance has proclaimed that his visionary policy of redemption is a reduction of VAT by 2.5%. That reduction has created miracles and has made January look like December and caused a great influx of activity in the economy. It's a pity, Mr. Speaker, that this is not felt by the vendors, by the speculators, by the housewives, or the ordinary workers of the country. The reduction in VAT may benefit foreign businesses, foreign business magnates with the $1 million land speculating deals who now have to pay less VAT and make more profit and still benefit from huge incentives. But the single mother of 5 living in Toulouse, Bagatelle, Conway, or Blasha has not felt any benefit in the VAT reduction. We call on the government to keep its campaign promise to the people of St. Lucia and further reduce VAT and to eventually eliminate it. That was a promise they made to the people of St. Lucia, that they would further reduce VAT and completely eliminate it. So we call upon them to keep that campaign promise to the people of St. Lucia. There is no evidence that the reduction of VAT has had any impact on the economy except a decrease of $20 million in tax revenue. Because that was a campaign promise. Contrary to the advice and pleadings of the opposition, the government reduced the cost of passports under the CIP program to $100,000 US. That reduction was expected to yield $43 million in revenue. However, even if that reduction, the estimates show that only $21 million was reported, a clear indication that there was underperformance. However, in another place and at another time, it was disclosed that 289 passports were sold. If that is indeed the case, then we should have collected $25 million US, minus commissions. I asked the Minister of Finance, where are the passport fees if indeed 289 passports were sold, as it was said in another place? The Minister of Finance indicated that passport sales from the CIP would be used to fund a foreign investor at 2%. How much money has been collected and how much money has been loaned to that foreign investor? How many hard-working solutions can get a loan from a financial institution at 2% interest to build their homes or to send their children to school? But the government of St. Lucia think it's a wise policy to take the money from the sale of our passports and for own lending to a foreign investor at 2% interest to build a hotel in St. Lucia. Our passport money, and you call it investment. Our passport money. Mr. Speaker, taxation. The results from taxation do not show the projected increase in business activity. It has no indication of December in January. Where is the evidence of the performance of the economy and the improvement in business activity as professed by the government finance gurus? It is reasonable to assume that if businesses are doing well, then they should pay more taxes. If there is increased business activity, there should be more taxes. The facts are as follows. I want to take you back to the Social and Economic Review. Taxes on income and profits decreased by 1% in 2018 when compared to 2017, and is projected to fall by 4.8% in 2018-2019. Where is the increase in business activity? How does that manifest itself in increased revenue from taxation if you indeed have December in January? Debt. Mr. Speaker, I refer to page 58 of the Social and Economic Review. Contrary to the view expressed by the Minister of Finance, public debt increased by 3.4%. I want you to read page 58. Mr. Speaker, and you'll see it. To $3.1 billion. The rate of debt accumulation picked up in 2017, marginally above the average of 3.3% over the previous years. So there was no increase in the decrease or decrease in the increase. The debt increased by 3.4%. That's what these are the facts. That is where these are the facts. And I want to note, Mr. Speaker, that the public debt does not include outstanding domestic payables to commercial banks and other institutions. That was $89 million in 2017 compared to $22 million in 2016, an increase of $65.9 million or 1.5% of GDP. If you add that to the debt, you will find that the debt to GDP ratio has increased to 70% of GDP. but that that $89 million of liabilities to commercial bank and other payables are not reflected in the debt. So what the government is doing, is they are bleeding the local banks, not paying people just to profess that they have great debt handling skills. $89 million not disclosed in the debt to GDP ratio. Mr. Speaker, there is a raging debate taking place on the privatization of the OKEU Hospital and St. Jude's Hospital. But as is typical of a government that has lost its way, in an arrogant and disdainful way, it refuses to discuss or consult with the people that elected it into government. And the whole problem with St. Jude's Hospital was started by this government. And now all kind of excuses are being made. I know the issue of St. Jude's Hospital will be ventilated at the policy meeting, but I want to make it abundantly clear that this, when we were in government, and the Honorable Stephenson King was Prime Minister, and changed his mind on whether you would build a new hospital or improve on the existing structure, and the UWP agreed, quite rightly, to build a new hospital. When we came to government, we continued. We never stopped the work that was started by the United Workers' Party on the St. Jude Hospital. I want to make it abundantly clear. So when you get the excuse about why didn't you finish the hospital, you know, naivety, things that they believe will play well to the gallery. Why didn't you finish the hospital? The fact is, we continue to work on the hospital. But you stopped it. You stopped it, and you allowed it. If you go there, you will see the state of the buildings. You see, Mr. Speaker, that can be a joke because they can put their people in helicopters and fly them to Miami. So it's a joke. So when we talk about health, it's a joke. We make a joke about it. Ha ha ha. We make a joke because when we get sick, we can jump in a plane and we can go to Miami. But the people of St. Lucia cannot afford to go in a plane and jump to Miami when they get sick. They have to go to the hospitals in St. Lucia, Madam Speaker. The money spent on the OKEU is part of grants in the estimates and some taxpayers' funds. And I'm sure our spokesman for health will continue. We note an amount on page 504 of $3 million for equipment for the OKEU hospital and $1.2 million for commission of the new hospital. Is that adequate? What about St. Jude's? Our position on St. Jude's is clear. No demolition, no alternative use, complete the hospital. The St. Lucia Labour Party never stopped work on the hospital. For over 2 years, the United Workers' Party has stopped work on the hospital. My party is concerned about the trend of this government to commit to deals and taking decisions even before consulting those who stand to benefit or be affected most by these decisions, particularly in serious matters of health. The primary reason for consultation, Mr. Speaker, is to seek consent from those who may be affected by a policy. A country that values democracy and a Prime Minister who understands the rights of citizens to participate in efforts of national development will ensure that there is no compromise, no short-circuiting of opportunities to engage the people of the country in decisions that can fundamentally affect their lives and livelihoods. Meaningful consultation must be transparent, and meaningful forms must be the cornerstone of informed decision-making and good governance. It is therefore not acceptable that the government to say to the public that these are only plans and consultations will commence shortly. The United Nations has outlined free FRW, prior and informed consent, FPIC, as a principle that must accompany any and every intervention that will impact on lives livelihoods, and future access to resources, particularly of the people of the country.
Honorable Member, you have 15 minutes left.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Put simply, any decision that will affect citizens should first be brought to them and seek their consent that is free and uninhibited by social, political, or partisan influence. The consent of the stakeholders must be prior to decisions being taken, and the consent of the public must be based on information that will help in the provision of informed consent. It is simply not acceptable to merely inform stakeholders of decisions of government. Democratic principles will demand that government establishes mechanisms to consult stakeholders and allow stakeholders to contribute to the design of policy programs and interventions that will affect them directly and indirectly. Any government that I have the honor to lead will engage stakeholders in shaping policy rather than informing them of locked and sealed decisions. And we call on government to begin free, prior, and informed consent on the future of healthcare, and the two hospitals in particular. Mr. Speaker, the only ministry, and I hope he doesn't get into trouble, that seems to be involved in some meaningful activity is the Ministry of Infrastructure. It's the only ministry, and the minister is the only ministry, and the minister will not be allowed to admit, well, the minister is the only ministry, and the minister will not be allowed to admit that the minister did not embark on a rampage of vindictiveness and dismantling what he got in the ministry. He continued to work on the two bridges. He continued to work on the Shoza School. He continued, albeit with great resistance from his colleagues, work on the Shoza School. He continued to work on the Denry schools. He continued most of the projects that had already been identified in the ministry. And I'm sure that in his response, he will attempt to give a country view for the sake of the party. I know for the sake of the party and to please his colleagues so that they cannot be more suspicious of him, he will appear to give a country view. However, I have heard the Minister of Finance speak of a lockbox. I want to find out how much is in the lockbox and what has been dispersed from that lockbox. Further, in payment for the Tiroshe roads, in the estimates, and I want to make it abundantly clear, that this party, we believe that people of Tiroshe, indeed the people of St. Lucia, need better roads. But the Minister of Finance has not come to the Parliament for approval of this design, finance, construct project, which is a loan, and it appears in the estimates. He has not come to Parliament for approval. I urge the Minister of Infrastructure to advise the Minister of Finance, he as a former Minister of Finance, to advise him to follow the law and present to Parliament a motion to seek approval for use of funds from the consolidated fund to pay the contractors, whoever they may be. And Mr. Speaker, I hope that the Marshall Main Road, I asked the Minister of Infrastructure, to remember the Marshall Main Road needs resurfacing as the drivers there also pay fuel taxes. If you allow me a few minutes, Mr. Speaker, I will speak about my constituency. As in the usual custom, people of Castries are used to being victimized when in opposition. No CDP, and I have in my possession no debushing. I have in my possession a request to the Castries constituency of people to do debushing work in Castries East. And if you challenge me, I can make it a document of the House. I want to tell you that we still believe in cashless ease. That even though we'll continue to vote for Labour, and even though we will always vote for Labour, and even if Philip J. Pierre will remain parliamentary rep for cashless ease, you must not make the people of cashless ease suffer.
That's right.
You must not make them suffer. And if you try the same old tactics, of giving the work to people who get defeated, the same way one got defeated twice, the other one get defeated twice and even thrice. I want to say to the people of, I want to say to the Minister of Housing that I want the regularization of the Bagatelle lands. That work has started. The surveys have taken place. I want them to continue regularization of the Rockhall school lands into the PROD program. That work has already started. I want them to continue the retaining structures in Bagatelle and particularly in Ravin to 12. And the Minister of Infrastructure, I don't want to get him in trouble, but I know he has gone and he has promised, because he sees it's necessary to do the wall for the people of Ravin to 12. And please, do not allow the people to suffer for choosing me as a representative. We did not allow the people, when we built the Geno retaining structures that cost over $4 million, we did not allow the people of Geno to suffer, even though they did not vote for us. Mr. Speaker, I expect the government, Mr. Speaker, I'm winding down. I expect the government to do the usual thing by attacking the messenger rather than deal with the content of the message. I expect to hear the same old refrain, you were there, you didn't do it, now you see that. You did it too, or you did it too, indicating that there is no desire to better the country. So the country must vote for worse instead of better. There is, yes, I expect to be attacked personally and attempts made to ridicule my colleagues and I. However, much they may try to deflect from the realities of everyday life in St. Lucia. The truth is, we have hit an all-time low in the way this country is being governed. Attacking members of the opposition will not solve the problem of the single mother of 5 in Toulouse and Blanchard, who have to face rising prices in supermarkets. And, Mr. Speaker, I want very quickly to give you an idea of how the prices in the supermarkets have gone up. A small tin of seabell tuna fish used to cost $2.41. Now it costs $2.94. A big tin of tuna fish used to cost $3.95. Now it costs $4.95. Salted biscuits cost $2.45. Now they cost $2.93. A large pack of salted biscuits used to cost $4.80. Now they cost $4.89. Red beans used to cost $4.16. Now they cost $4.51. Magic coconut oil used to cost $14.60. Now they cost $16.66. And even saltfish that used to cost $14.70, now they cost $15.20. So, Madam Speaker, in St. Lucia, that's the reality that St. Lucians have to spend, that to face in the supermarkets. The fisher folk who have to cope with higher prices of fuel, and the farmers whose livelihoods are threatened by a pipe dream project in Beaufort. Name calling of the opposition will not improve the terrible conditions of St. Jude Hospital and the deplorable state of health facilities in the country. Name calling will not shield the government from the reality of blacklisting on account of its negligence and its failed. Name calling will not cause the government to implement their manifesto promises like the elimination of VAT. Name calling will not improve how the poor standing of donor countries and our reputation with international agencies. Mr. Speaker, these estimates will not inspire any hope or fulfill the aspirations of the youth or the people of St. Lucia. We, however, will continue to do our work and represent the men and women of St. Lucia who voted for the St. Lucia Labour Party and who depend on us to protect the interests of our country. The party that I lead will be steadfast in its responsibility to the people of this country who desire strong and responsible opposition. Mr. Speaker, I end with these words from the Holy Book. Be strong in the Lord, in his mighty power. Put on all of God's armor so that you will be able to stand firm against all strategies of the devil. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.